It's time for another insightful interview here on Commentator's Corner. And joining me from the United States of America is a man that's raced on four wheels, and he's also spent quite a lot of time in Germany. So we have a mutual association, not just in motorsport, but also speaking in two different languages. Herzlich willkommen, Michael Johnson, to Commentator's Corner. So good to have you along for the ride, Michael. Firstly, one of the things I like my guests to do is to actually give their own introduction. So in your own time, the folks at home, tell us what your role is within the world of motorsport.
My role in motorsport is constantly evolving. I've
Hmm.
been a driver, I've been a coach, I've been a fan, I've been all sorts of things. And as we get older and things get worn out and don't work as well or don't feel so good when you move them, you tend to lean towards more the coaching end of things. While I do still drive, I don't drive nearly as much as I used to, and I do a lot more coaching now, and I've been having a lot of fun doing some broadcast stuff as well.
Yeah, we've been recently working alongside each other for the driving club at Road Atlanta iRacing Winter Series. There were a couple of problems in the last few broadcasts. I think there was one where I had an issue, then Daniel had an
Yeah,
issue, then I was late for one of the broadcasts, and it does happen, considering the time
it does.
differential. The time differential does happen, but um, we'll get on to obviously the varying nuances of driver coaching. And obviously the fact that you haven't just been coaching the USA, you've also been you also used to have a Twitter handle, if I remember correctly, was at Porfifahrer, and you were based in Germany
Yeah,
for
now.
quite a lengthy time. But Michael, the first question that I really ask my guests is that how did you get introduced to motorsport? Because there's always a backstory of how this love and this passion was kindled for all things that burnt rubber and burnt fuel and made a hell of a noise whilst going around track.
Well, it was probably the hell of a noise that came out of the Lamborghinis of the 70s and 80s era, and then the Corvettes and just all the big rumbly things. Really enjoyed that. My mother, so her third husband, was a big motorhead kind of guy. He was always gearhead, wanted to be in the car. He had a 1964 Corvette that was primer gray, and he had a 74 Corvette that was white. That was when they were getting to know each other right before they got married, and he still had that for a while, and it really caught my attention to be able to be around a car like that 60s era, that 70s era. There was something about the car, and it wasn't just about it's fast in a straight line. It wasn't so much that it was a drag strip, put it in gear and just launch and go fast in a straight line. It would also go around corners. And I recall he also at some point bought a Scirocco, so the Volkswagen
Hmm.
Scirocco, and bought a Porsche 924, which was I guess, sort of the predecessor to the 944. Still a lot of parts shared heavily
Yep.
through them. And I really got to understand there was more than just the big rumbly sounds. There was a lot of energy dissipation that would happen through the braking, and the tires would get overheated. And he started even doing autocross. And I would go out there and learn. And as long as nobody from the constabulary is listening, I would actually drive when I was 8, 9 years old. I might not have been able to reach the pedals, but I could hold onto the steering wheel and
Hmm.
sit in my mother's lap or my stepdad's lap and steer the car. And once I could reach the pedals, I actually drove on public roads in an old, I believe the very first one I could do it all the way by myself was hmm, I forget the exact era. It was probably late 70s, early 80s Mercedes-Benz 280, something like that.
Okay.
240, 280,
Yeah.
four-door, nice car, drove super smooth. Loved it. It was great because I was driving, even though I was only, I don't know, 8, 9, but I'd already been in go-karts and stuff like that. So I had an understanding of what the pedals do and what the steering wheel does. And I even learned that you should really use a turn signal. So that was good too.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of sitting on my mum's lap, and she had a bright banana yellow MGBG GT from
Oh,
'78, and that was the H pattern 4 speed with the. And this is how far myself and Michael go back. If anyone might remember what an overdrive switch was on on the top of the stick
yeah.
shift,
Yeah, you
she
hit that
had.
button. Yeah.
Yeah, oh well, I was only allowed to go as far as the driveway, and that was it. And it was we'd spent. I mean, like my mum would say, "Come on, we cut it out. You know, you've had your fun." And I'm just like, just another 5 minutes, just another 5 minutes. So, and this is back in the day when 5 speed manuals were starting to come in. You know, like say with the dog legs
Mhm.
on the 328 GTSs, the 308s. You know, when we're seeing the advent of Tom Selleck as the enigmatic
Yes.
Magnum PI, and then we got into Knight Rider
And
with
that still
kits.
comes on. It's
It
in
does.
reruns now, and I love watching it because of the car.
Yeah, and it was quite funny wondering then being explained why women were swooning over Tom Selleck, and I said it's got to be the facial hair, it's got to be the
Yeah,
tash,
it's the mustache.
it's the mustache, which
I can't make mine come in like his
I
was,
know, I
it's
know.
special, but
He's
I still get to,
he's
enjoy it.
still in the cop drama with Donnie Wahlberg. He still is the commissioner of the local police department. Has
Hmm.
the tash still there, even in his 70s. So, but yeah, that
He was Monica's boyfriend on Friends, and he
yes,
had the stash going on then too.
yes, that oh crikey. Now we're talking. Now we're talking these folks. Yeah, I mean, coming back to the love of cars. What was your first car that you got when you passed your test? Because obviously in the US, you guys no, because this is going to be talking about our love for vehicles, but also love for racing. I mean, I'll start off. I mean, my first car, 1986, bright flame red Mini Chelsea 998cc, each pattern 4 speed. And unfortunately, if anyone might remember how the when the Mini Moke first made its appearance, you had those god awful black, like industrial, like heavy duty black paints put on them. Mine was,
Hmm.
you know, it was a lovely car, had all the chrome, so the grille around the headlights, the bumpers, and then these two, front and rear god awful bumpers. And I was just like thinking, okay, so I've got a bit of extra protection in case I stack it. That was my first car at age 17, but I couldn't drive it on the public roads without a learner's permit until I passed my test, age 19. We're talking 94. What about yourself, Michael?
So are you familiar with Krispy Kreme,
Yes,
the donuts?
yes,
And you know their color scheme. It's white with kind of a teal-ish,
yeah,
greenish blue sort of. It's Krispy Kreme. So I had a, an inline six, three on the tree, Krispy Kreme paint job Chevrolet van. It had
okay.
mag wheels with like raised white letter around, and then I think they were American racing wheels, but three on the tree. And I think I discovered drifting. Like that's what I did with I invented drifting in that 1974 six-cylinder straight inline six, three on the tree Chevy van. That was me. I'm to blame for drifting.
And probably peeing off the local constabulary whilst you're at it as well, if it was at 3 in the morning or something like that during your wilder days.
They may or may not have pursued me a time or two.
But obviously, from having being surrounded by all that that ASMR with regards to the engine noise, of course it led you on to racing. Now, what did you go first? Did you go two wheels, or did you go four? What was the how did the journey evolve as well?
So go-karting, and I was just trying to think. I think the official story is it was my eighth birthday, but I'm not certain it was on my birthday. I don't remember if it was my eighth or my ninth. And my stepdad took me go-karting. So one of those birthdays, I went ice skating and I broke my wrist. The other birthday, I can't remember which order they came in, but the other birthday I went go-karting and it was on my birthday. And I say it's my eighth. That just makes it sound like I've been racing a year longer than I have. So go-karting, and then um, even stretched out into other types of racing uh, with machinery, BMX bikes, and then road bicycles and motorcycles. and then cars, and it's all really a big blur. I mean, the period of bicycles was pretty solid, and I still have a very nice road bike. I have a beautiful Trek USPS with nice bone trigger wheels and super skinny tires, and I could go out. Well, I'd like to think I could go out and ride a century, but I'm quite certain I would be breathing hard after about 6 miles or so. So maybe no centuries for me nowadays, but I still enjoy hopping in the saddle and going for a ride here and there. But then once cars came around, once I got 15, 16 years old, I had my friends at school for some reason called it the Japanese tennis shoe. It was a Toyota Starlet. Now,
Okay.
the Starlet is like a Corolla, but rear wheel drive instead of front wheel drive. They look almost identical, and only if you know the little idiosyncrasies between them do you know which car it is. And that was probably my first race car. And the interesting thing was I couldn't drive it to the racetrack because I had a racing license, but not a street license. So that car I got to drive, and so I would go to the racetrack with a friend, and that friend, we would get to the racetrack, and you had to either have a racing license or be 18 to be able to drive on the property.
Okay.
So the of the racetrack. So we'd get to the gate, we'd pull up to the gate, open the doors, run around, hop in, and then I would drive onto the track, or onto the racetrack property, and I could drive all the way there, I mean, all on the property, and then we would leave at the end of the weekend, turn around, come out, and then we'd do the same thing and switch, and then my buddy would drive home, and he also got to be crew. That was interesting, that we did that. Um, and that car was quite special. I had gotten the racing motor, the 1.6 liter, I think it
Hmm.
was, Toyota racing motor in that car, and it weighed maybe 1,600 pounds, so three-quarters of a ton. Um, Not a lot of weight, but a lot of power out of that little motor. And it would rev and rev and rev and rev. You think Formula One engines of that era? Yeah, no, this thing would rev to, God, I think about 14,000 or
Oh my God.
really get up there. And yeah, it was obviously a swap in there. And that car was shockingly fast. Basic, decent suspension on it. I had the AW8s from Yokohama as for the tires on it, and it was perfectly street. Well, I want to say it was perfectly street legal, but I knew someone, so it might not have been extremely 100% above board. But it was okay on the racetrack. It was amazing.
I think we'll have to plead the Fifth Amendment on the ties. Then you say.
Yeah,
But from having a car like that, I mean, you've raced in so much, where you look at what you've raced in. You raced in what was originally the Continental Tire Sports Car Challenge. You've raced in the Sin
yeah.
R1
When it was Grand
GT4.
Am, yeah.
Yeah, when it
So
was
it was Grand Am
back in the
is
day.
when I started. Yeah.
But I mean, out of all the cars you've driven throughout your racing career, what would you say is the one that you felt to be a kindred spirit, a car that where it felt like driver, car, and circuit was pretty much as close to perfection as you could get it?
One of my favorite cars. It's really hard because there's so many. I mean, there was an old 911 that I had living in Germany for a while. I had a 74 Targa that was just a dream to drive. It wasn't particularly fast, but it was fast enough and it was a lot of fun. But as far as the professional level, um, I've driven prototypes. I've driven GT3s and GT4s, and I absolutely love the Sen R1 GT4 at Coda. But if I have to really think about the car that got my heart going, that I was super excited every single time I went to go sit in it. It would have to be the Mitchum Motorsports BMW 128. That car, it was the Grand Am car. It was the one I started in Grand Am with. And I was driving with Johnny Cannabis when we started, and a couple of other people, the two Pete's, and then yeah. But that car, it just everything worked beautifully. and it flowed. I even got to drive with Jim Johnson, the producer for Pitbull, or yeah, I think he was the producer for Pitbull. We got to drive. He has his own team, or had his own team, Rebel Rock, and I did a little bit with them, and that was fun. The only time I didn't like the car was when I drove it with Jim at Barber Motorsports Park, and all through practice, everything was great. And then, right before qualifying, they restricted our RPM. So going through museum turn, I would come through and I was making a shift. It was either the third or fourth gear. I think it was fourth gear, coming through in third. Then I go to pull fourth gear and it wouldn't go in gear because the chassis had flexed so much. And because our RPMs were shortened by like 250 RPM, it was just at the point where I couldn't quite pull the gear.
Hmm.
And I would either bounce off the rev limiter or I would have to lift, pull the gear, and then go. And it cost us three-quarters of a second per lap to do that, but we were just too fast otherwise. And but that car, I loved it, and I remember the person who bought it. I offered to coach them for free because I loved the car so much. I said, I will coach you. I don't know, 10 hours or something. I made some offer to the person who ended up buying the car because I loved it so much. It was just an absolute dream to drive everywhere I drove it.
Funny enough, that's actually one of the cars very much featured on your website as well, which I'll link in the
For
description down
obvious
below
reasons, yes.
for obvious reasons. But I mean, when you look at cars like that, where it's a road going vehicle that has been converted from street to race course, the cars, they're stripped of all the mod cons, so no AC, no Apple CarPlay, roll cage, 4 point or 6 point harness, bucket seats. You're
It's
like literally you're strapped in there very very tightly. Come rain or come shine. But I think
window
it's
net, center net,
yeah,
I mean
exactly. You
everything.
radio to the pits and everything as long as it works. I think to hear that kind of story when that you had such a connection with that car that the person that bought it, you said, look, here's what I'm prepared to do. So, folks, it just goes to show that motorsport, yes, even though it is a business, there is
Mhm.
still that passion that emanates throughout all of our pools. It doesn't matter whether you're a racing driver, whether you're on the microphone calling a race or whatever. There's something that just gets the adrenaline going, isn't there?
Absolutely. I get as much excitement, honestly, doing a broadcast as I do when I'm in a car. I mean, you could put me in the newest prototype that's still being tested that the general public doesn't know about yet. And yet, it's exciting. I have a great time. I also love sitting there with someone like you and have iRacing up and my timing and scoring, and I'm watching what's going on, and I'm watching these people in a virtual world enjoy motorsport really at a level that I've gotten to do it. I mean, I've driven GT3s and prototypes, LMP2, LMP1. I think I can tell you that one. Yeah, there's some things that are NDAs for. So, like, well, okay. Yeah, I mean, I've driven a lot of different things for testing because I'm kind of a savant of sorts. I'm really, really good at CODA. Been at Circuit of the Americas since before it was built. I have a picture of me at turn 11, doing a selfie, cameras out, doing a
Yeah.
selfie, looking down from turn 11 all the way down the straightaway, and you can see it's all just dirt and mud, and they're construction vehicles doing their thing. Yeah, but I have been at CODA since the very first track day event there, and I just have a knack for that course. I've gotten pole positions there many times. One of my best runs at COTA was from 25th so I qualified 25th because there was on the on the back of the car, it was like 2 millimeters off on the right side as opposed to the left. It was just a tiny bit lower, and it caused something weird in the diff, and I couldn't get it. I was telling Danny, the car chief, I'm like, Danny, something's wrong with the car. It's not working. And my co-driver, because this was in IMSA, so it was multiple drivers. My co-driver didn't really notice, but I did. And something's wrong with the car. Something's wrong with the car. And he went back through with a very, very fine tooth comb and found that 2 millimeter difference. And I started off in 25th. And when I handed the car off, I was in fifth place. So I worked my way through the field at Coda. So Coda is kind of a special place for me. So I do a lot of testing and a ton of different cars. Not all of them I can tell you about.
No, because there. I mean, the thing is with Michael's skills, obviously developing cars, you're at the behest of the team or the manufacturer who says, "Look, we need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You cannot tell a
Yeah.
soul about that." There is so much covert work that happens behind the scenes that even like I've been in
Hmm.
motorsport for I think now over a decade, and even when it's quite funny when people from outside of the realm of motorsport say, or is there something secret you can tell us? And it's sort of like, well, I could, but someone would kill
No,
me and you at the
I
same
don't want to
time.
get sued.
Yeah, exactly. So
And I want to get hired
there's,
next time they come back. So, Ferrari shows up, Porsche shows up,
yeah,
Audi shows
exactly.
up, whoever it is comes in, they want to know that I am not giving away the secrets. Because I mean, I have actually done, let's say it's VW and I don't know, Audi. They're kind of the same company. Let's say VW and GM back-to-back weekends. It wasn't those two. I've done back-to-back weekends, and somebody will have said, "Hey, you were here last weekend," or I will have mentioned in passing, "That's right. So and so was doing testing." Yeah, what can you tell us? Absolutely nothing. I can't say a word. I can give my impressions. I can tell you what I think, and most of the time they're just different class cars, but not always. In one specific case, there were two cars, exact same class, and I drove them back to back weekends, and I could not share between the two manufacturers what was going on with the other one because, I have a conscience.
Yeah, and plus also it's the professional courtesy that to any client that you have to parlay, as you say, having a conscience, saying, look, yep, I'll do the work, and then being quizzed about it the week after and saying, look, I'd like to tell you, but I've got a contract with the other party. I cannot disclose who it was with, what I was testing, how
Yeah.
competitive that, where its weak points were, where its strengths were. You just basically say, yeah, I
Hmm.
was here, but I can't tell you a thing. So,
I've
I
even worked with Formula One drivers at Coda.
mhm.
They've come out and wanted to work on things with their team, and they would bring a previous season's car because they couldn't do testing in current season car. But I've worked with several different ones to try to help them get better. And well, so far I've got a pretty good track record on that one because they've always done better.
Yeah, and that just shows the value of people like Michael when it comes to the the minutest of details. I mean, even now you look at modern day karting, Michael,
Yeah.
because I commentate in karting in continental Europe. Whenever I go to one of the big teams, what I see is a row of carts. Each cart has its own mechanic, and then you have 3 to 4 toolkits which actually are set up like data rigs because there's so many sensors. So for like engine temperature, even though modern day karting you can't use coolant in an engine coolant system, you have to use water as per regulation. But they'll check water temp, oil temp, speed, they'll braking and throttle inputs. So even though it might be a simple pull lever on both pedals, it still will be attached to a sensor that's locked in with the engine. I mean, data from your perspective is such a great indicator in helping drivers to extract those hundredths, those tenths of a second across the lap where their braking inputs are. You know when people are braking
Hmm.
early, what the steering is doing as a direct result. If they've hit the brakes a bit too late into the corner, the steering first of all is going to vibrate a little bit. It's going to cause the car to lose a bit of momentum, maybe a little bit of slippage on the front end, depending on whether it's front or wheel drive. And then it's applying the power not too early out of the corner, but at the right point. It's like saying, well, you were 20 yards late accelerating out of that corner, or you were 25 yards too late on your braking. The details that can be found in telemetry are so astounding from my perspective. It makes the difference, doesn't it, per lap time?
It does. And it's funny you mentioned 20 yards. There was a world championship level Formula One driver, several of them that I worked with. And I was saying, I need you to brake about half a meter early, and I swear it was to the millimeter. At 300 kilometers an hour, it can still differentiate. I mean, when you get to that level, and I'm watching and I'm looking at the data, and I see what's going on, and the car. So first thing is, when you brake early or brake late or go to throttle too soon or too late, or it's dead on, or you're turning in, I mean, all the different things that we can measure within the car, there's always a knock-on effect. So I can maybe miss that they braked a little bit too early or a little bit too late, but I see that there's a positioning issue, that the car is too wide or too narrow or too much rotation in the car. So I might notice that, and I can go back and go, if they braked 3 meters early or 3 meters later or 5 meters later, maybe that would change this. And when you're working with people who are able to, at 300 kilometers an hour, say, well, okay, I'm going to go half a meter later or half a meter earlier, and just absolutely nail it, even if it's just over the radio. Because in some of these cases, we have a telemetry. So we're seeing live inputs for the car. Like GT3 and above, you can do that. GT4, you're not allowed in most series. And any of the touring cars, you're not allowed to have telemetry. But any GT3s or prototypes or most of the higher level formula cars, you can have live telemetry. So being able to watch someone go into a corner and see how the car reacts and look at the different wheel speeds and look at the pitch of the car. How much compression are we seeing on the front versus the rear, and then be able to say, "Hey, I need you to change this by 2 meters," and then the next time around, they change it by exactly 2 meters. It's pretty impressive to work with people at that level. But it's also even more impressive. There's a guy that I work with out of New York, really nice guy. Took him from club racing into the pro level. He was racing in World Challenge, and I remember coaching him one time. I want to say it was at Lime Rock, and I won't say his name, but I said his name over the radio. I need you to delay your turn in for turn one by about 3 meters. And he absolutely nailed it. So this isn't something that's only top level F1 drivers or top level sports car prototype drivers. This can be anyone. When you're able to develop the kind of awareness in them that they need to have to be really, really good at this. And I say really good, meaning you're getting into the level of pro drivers or very high end amateur drivers, and you're making little changes like 3 meters later for your turn in, and they're able to nail it. That's the kind of stuff that I love about coaching, is I'm
Mm,
able to get them to have that level of awareness. They know that if they go into the brake zone and they see the curbing on the left side, and there's a red one and a white one and a red one and a white one, that they're about this far apart because we did a track walk. We were out there walking it. So they know that at this particular track, if I go uh, one more red one and one more white one, now I've gone 3 meters or 6 meters or 2 meters or however far it is.
mm.
And they know how far they've gone, and they can judge that the next time they come into the corner and make that turn in just a little bit later. And it really wells my everything. I'm just so excited that, oh my God, they did exactly what I said, and it's working. Because
Mm.
sometimes, to be honest, it's, let's try this and see if it works. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But when it does work and they've absolutely nailed it, it just, there's such a joy that comes over.
I mean, every single driver is a different canvas on which you can paint an imprint on to a certain extent. It's not just about the numbers. It's not just about the data. It's about finding a way to communicate differently with each individual, because everyone has different learning, like learning styles, or some are quick learners, some take maybe a couple of extra tries, and then you tell it to them and say, okay, right, let me explain it to you this
Mhm.
way. It is very different with different drivers, isn't it, Michael? Because no one's exactly the
Yeah.
same. We're all imperfect. We're all part of the human condition. We all have our different ways of learning.
And it also depends on the mood of that driver that day. That can be something that changes as well. I've worked with people. Let's take the guy from New York as an example. There was one day. But I was working with him, and it was all very positive, and man, you're really nailing this and you're getting it. And then a couple of weeks later, we went to another race and we're working on stuff. And I'm saying, "Hey, look, yeah, you're really getting in there. You've got that braking down at the right point, and I just need you to do it a little bit earlier because you're over slowing a bit. So let's bring it back a little bit. But man, you're really great." And didn't really communicate. And then it triggered in my head, we need to communicate a different way today. And it just turned into commands. You're going to brake 2 meters earlier here to get your speed right at the apex. Instead of, man, you're doing this really fantastic. He didn't need that weekend. The requirement, it worked fine the 2 weeks earlier, but that weekend he needed, tell me what to do, tell me when to do it, tell me how to do it, and just no nonsense. Yeah, everybody's different. And sometimes they're different on different weekends or different hours of the day, too. Because sometimes at the end of a day, I don't know if you're familiar or if the viewers are familiar, there's a group here in the US called Chen Track Days, and they have what they call the open happy hour at the end of the day. So everybody does their normal track day sessions. They go out and drive and have a good time. Then at the end of the day, the last hour on track is open track, open passing with a point. So you have to point out the window or over the roof that there's a pass. Or I think they'll also let you use turn signals to indicate which side to pass on. But it's all groups, all intermixed, and they go out and they have a good time. Now, I could have been working with someone earlier in the day and getting through to them, but when you get out into that, it's like a cacophony of cars, if I want to mix that up a little bit. So you've got some people who are very slow in incredibly fast cars, and you have some people who are very fast in incredibly slow cars, and then you have people who are matched perfectly to their car, and you've got race cars, and you have everything out there. And to be able to jump from my little confined group of people who were all in very fast cars, and most of them were race cars, and they're doing what you do in race cars, and then having it be mixed. Sometimes you have to change not just the tone of voice, but even the terminology you use. Having a huge depth of experience in two languages to be able to run people through the gamut of a day like that with a group like Chen. And I love working with Chen because they do have that open track day, which gives people that I'm working with the understanding of what it's like to be in multi-class racing. Even though it's not racing, it's clearly not racing, but it gets you to the point of understanding where you have vehicles that are much slower and vehicles that are much faster zipping by you. So you're used to that when you do get into a racing situation.
Now, obviously, we mentioned about the German connection between you and I. Obviously, you've been over in Germany for quite a few years, plying your trade over there as a driver coach. What were the biggest differences that you found? I think not just in terms of language and culture, but in terms of the application to coaching people in a different language, not your mother tongue, but one that you are very, very fluent in. I can attest to that. And how long were you over in Germany for professionally?
Well, I spent my first year in Germany. So I was born there. I was born in Augsburg in the south. And my first word was German. A whole ton of words that came after that were all American English. And then I moved back to Germany. When I moved back, I became fluent in about 6 months because I really put my mind to it and said, I'm going to do this, and did well enough. Went to university and was able to get, I mean, they didn't do the testing back then like they do now, but it would be A2, which is just fluent, so where I got to. But I think the biggest difference, and it is a little bit cultural,
Mm,
is the seriousness and the overall mindset that a German or even most Europeans have about driving. You are taught significantly better than your standard average. Not to say that all American drivers are bad. That's clearly not true.
mm,
Not
agreed.
to say that all German drivers are good,
Also agreed.
but I think there is a level of training. Actually, I know there's a level of training that goes into getting just your basic driver's license in Germany. It's not cheap. I mean, when I was living there, it was 3,000 marks to go through the class. And if you failed, you went back to the beginning of the class and you paid another 3,000 marks to go through the class. So it wasn't cheap. That was part of taking it incredibly seriously. You didn't want to necessarily spend, or in some cases, have your parents spend extra money so you could take the class again because you had failed it the first time. I remember the the test, there were multiple parts to the test. There was a written test that you had to score 90% on to pass. So 90 or better to pass, not 70 or better or 65 or better or whatever it is, depending on the state you're in here in the US,
Mhm.
but 90% or better. And it was not easy. And then the road signs test, you had to pass, you had a passing score minimum was 98%. You had to know the road signs. So that was different. And then you're driving. If you got in the car and you turned it on and you didn't make a check of your mirrors, you probably failed. So you get in the car, you're in the parking lot, you're on angeschnallt, sorry, I'm thinking in
Seatbelts.
German now. Seatbelts, thank you. You put your seatbelt on and you start the car, and if you didn't do a mirror check,
Yes.
they could, and often, I don't want to say often did, but I knew people who were told they failed because they didn't do a
Yeah.
mirror check before they pulled away
One of
or
my
started
one.
to even put it in gear.
Okay, just to put a currency perspective on 3,000 Deutschmarks at that point, in today's money would be about rack you up nearly 1,700 US dollars, which
Yeah,
is
that's yeah, around them.
around.
And actually, that would be about $1,700 at the time. And while they were still using Deutschmark, that was in the 90s even.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
the Deutschmark was still being used, early 90s. And then I moved back to the US in 95.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it was 95. And so Deutschmark was still in use at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I did my well in the UK when you're doing your GCSEs, which is basically 16 before you go into
Mhm.
college, and at that point we're talking 94, so the year before you moved back stateside, and yeah,
Mhm.
they were still using German marks, and then I think the next time after that, my first return to Germany was 2018, and by then, well, obviously everyone was using the euro at that point, so
Yeah.
it was a very very different mindset back then. But I still remember I ended up working in an electronics stroke store, which also happened to have a record store alongside it called Schauland, which had the white ghost as its logo in Hamburg Central. And so I'd be doing, I think it was two
Was that the
weeks.
one that was multiple stories?
Yes, yes, it was
Okay,
multiple.
so
Yeah, so it was right in the
if
center of the
can we
Hamburg
switch
Mall.
gears for a second?
Go on.
So, switching gears to audio engineering, a lot of what I did in the Netherlands in Germany, uh, I did I did like everything, but one of the things I did was audio engineering. And in Hamburg, we went to that store, and on the roof of the building, we had Die Toten Hosen. Do you know Die Toten
Die
Hosen?
Tonhosen, yes, die Fantastischen
Yeah.
Vier,
So Fantastic and Fia weren't there, but I was on
but
tour
no.
with them for a couple of things. But die Toten Hosen did a rooftop concert there because their new album had just come out, and I was one of the people. I think I was the monitor engineer for that particular show.
Yeah, the funny thing is that I've actually just looked it up because Schauland was big in the 90s. It was a proper GmbH. It was a computer shop, electronics store, and also we had the Deutsche Hitparade, which at that point had David Hasselhoff's albums
Yes,
frequenting on there. But yeah, that Schauland,
next to the Udo Jürgens
oh
and
my God,
Hoffs.
yeah. It's just, and the funny thing is that it was there's actually a Reddit thread about the bizarre logo of defunct German electronics retailer Schauland, and then you had on that same building you had Quelle Technic
Mhm.
Center and all that kind of stuff. And I was there for 2 weeks. And it was also at that point, folks. At 16, you can go legally into a beer cellar and get drunk.
Oh, sure.
And the two Friday nights, the student who I was staying with his family, we'd go to the local beer cellar, which is literally 5 minutes down the road, and we'd wander back at 3 in the morning.
Yeah, it was 5 minutes to get there. It was 15 to get
Oh
back
no,
because
it was
we went
30
this
depending on
path.
it was 30
30.
it was 30 depending on who was the most drunk out of me and the student, and it was normally the student because at that point, when you're 16 in the UK, you're not legally allowed to drink, and it's even worse in the US when it's 21 for the majority of
Yes.
races as well. But then coming back to now, obviously we've seen since COVID-19 this big change in how things have happened with regards to racing, but also with regards
Hmm.
to the advent of simulators. Now, obviously, we've got the big players out there. We've got iRacing, we've got Assetto Corsa Evo, we've got Automobilista 2, we've got Gran Turismo, and then you look at people who have come through, like say,
Milan's Ultimate.
yeah, exactly, Le Mans Ultimate, R Factor 2. You look at you look at people that have come through the ranks. I mean, obviously, for those that might remember, Jan Mardenborough, Lucas Ordonez have come through. But William Byron came from
Hmm.
iRacing and is now a two-time back-to-back Daytona 500 winner. And
Hmm.
he was in the playoffs, I think, last year for the title, because I think it was Joey Logano that won the title in 22, got knocked out of the playoffs in the opening round of the playoffs, and it was the first driver in a long, long time. And you still got people like Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, who continue to ply their trade. I think there's one person that I'm really taking an interest, and it's not because of his activism, but because of the fact that a certain six-time NBA champion has now invested in a team alongside Denny Hamlin with technical support from Joe Gibbs Racing. Of course, Michael
Hmm.
Jordan, legend from the Chicago Bulls, is Bubba Wallace, who I have to say is he's improving year by year, and to
Hmm.
have the backing of the first major black owner of a NASCAR Cup Series squad through 2311 racing with Toyota as their choice of manufacturer is showing really good things. But we're seeing the translation now. Coming back to the point I was just about to make was we're seeing a lot of drivers like Will Byron, like Jan Mardenborough, like Lucas Ordonez. We're seeing a lot of these people come through from sim racing to being put in the car for real. I mean, like with the Racing Prodigy series now, where they're racing radicals all over the place, like NOLA and everywhere else, which is getting big traction. They've got Catherine Legg as one of the driver coaches for one of the teams. Tatiana
Yeah, she's
Codron
amazing. Yeah,
is
I've taken some hints from her here and there and been like, oh wow, I never looked at it that way. That totally works. She's amazing.
Yeah, but I mean, what are your thoughts on how not just karting but sim racing is becoming really a true backbone of helping drivers get into real life motorsport? There's more crossover than I think a lot of people want to believe.
Well, a lot of times the crossover goes the other way. They're used to pro drivers jumping into iRacing and ACC and things like that. And it feels really good when you're a good sim racer and someone like me or Gregory LaFouge or Andy Lally. Andy doesn't do it that much, but shows up and you're able to beat us. And even like I remember racing Fernando Alonso and beating him. I was like, wow, holy cow, I just beat Fernando Alonso. And it was actually him. It wasn't one of his buddies. You could tell by the way he was driving, it was him. So, but going the other way, it is really interesting. I remember, I think it was Gran Turismo 5. So GT5 was the first one where they were trying to go from zero to hero. And so if you were good in Gran Turismo 5 and then you went to Silverstone and like I remember thinking, oh, well, yeah, I've got some background, maybe I'll play this. And I started playing it and I was doing pretty well and I got into the top 256 or top 512. I think I was like number 400. Maybe if I apply myself a little bit, I could do even better. Then it was the top 256 and I was like something like that. And then it was the top 128, and then it was the top 64, and I think I was like 62. And then when it went to the top 32, or maybe no, it was the top 16 that I didn't quite make it to because some real life stuff got in the way. and I really couldn't do it. But one of my clients that I've worked with, Greg Russell, he would absolutely mop the floor with me in GT5. But we were going out to Summit Point Raceway in West Virginia, not really a suburb of DC, but a lot of Washington DC residents, people from that area, go out to Summit Point, and we went out there, and it was interesting to see how good he was in the sim, how much he struggled in the real life situations, and we work to bridge that, to find those similarities and to think about and this was one of the really big first challenges in coaching for me, was how to build that bridge, how
Yep.
how to go from, all right, here's what he knows, here's what he needs to know, what are the bits and pieces in between there that I can make that bridge to help him understand and perform better. And the guy who ended up winning that season, I remember, so Greg went to Silverstone, and I think he made it maybe two eliminations, and then something happened. He got injured in one of the physical things and got bounced out, which was unfortunate because I think he was probably better than the person who won that season. And the person who won that season, Brian Heidkotter, was racing for Nissan Motorsports. He's very good now. I recognized in him a lot of the things I saw working with Greg. Greg had the issues that we talked about, and Brian got into these cars in the GS class. And I remember coming up on him a couple of times in ST, thinking, is he broken? And he might have been. I don't know. But
Mm.
there were just things that didn't always click. To clarify, ST is a lower class than GS. It's supposed to be slower, although sometimes when it's wet, things
Yeah.
don't always work out that way.
True.
But yeah, so I remember coming up on Brian a couple of times thinking something's wrong with the car, and he just wasn't as comfortable when he first started racing in the real car. Now, he did get to be excellent. He is a very good driver now. And I think a lot of that comes from two things. The background he had in racing the simulator in GT5. And the biggest thing, I think, and this sounds weird coming from a professional race car driver, humility. He was, you couldn't touch him. I remember in GT5, and I'd come up and tried to race him a couple of times, and he was faster than Greg in GT5, and he would just absolutely slaughter me. But then he had to get into a real car on a real racetrack with real pros and try to race, and it wasn't as easy for him. And I think that good background, so good solid foundation. And when he went to Silverstone and went through all of that program, they gave him a brilliant foundation. But then the humility that came with, you might be faster, but it doesn't mean you're going to win, which is something that I think changes a lot when you go from a simulator with, let's take iRacing, for example. In iRacing, you have multiple tiers, so splits, they call them,
Yeah.
and the best drivers are in the top split, and then the next split and the next split. And I've seen people like, oh yeah, I won my race and it was really great, and I can't believe I won. I'm like, well, which split were you in? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And you look up and they were in the sixth or seventh split. It's like, I could have probably gone in reverse and won that split. That's a little bit of hyperbole, but where you race and who you race with really makes a difference. So I think iRacing is one of those places where I think you do have some excellent drivers who, for the lack of money, should be in a real race car at a real racetrack and doing what they do in the sim in real life.
Yeah, I think the very same could be said about Sebastian Job, Red Bull Racing esports driver. He's a multi-time Porsche esports Super Cup champion. He went from Carrera Cup, and there's a series which I'm actually going to link down below, where it's about his journey from being on the sim to going into real life cars, and then having one of the Red Bull originals in terms of the drivers who does a lot of coaching at the Red Bull Ring in Austria, and
Hmm.
they actually put him in an actual Formula One car. And of all people, who turns up? Christian Horner, and said, and was completely blown away on how far Sebastian was behind it. I mean, now
Hmm.
Max Verstappen is now bringing Chris Lullum of Team of Verstappen.com
Yeah.
Redline into
Yeah,
GT
Redline Racing.
racing this year with Thierry Vermeulen, and
Hmm.
I think it's GT World Challenge Europe. I think,
Yeah, it sounds right. I remember reading it, but I can't remember the
yeah.
exact details.
So when you think about it, there are these drivers who have got, you look at, like, say, Max Benecker over 10 and a
Max,
half.
yeah, right.
Max, who's one of the
He's up
most
to what, 11,000 I rating now,
11,000
which
plus I
is,
rating, which is just beggars
yeah.
belief. There are so many young sim racing drivers who are in their early 20s, mid 20s, who are now through teams that they're a part of that have an affiliation,
Hmm.
now are having this chance, which is really, really good to see.
And I think they deserve the chance. I mean,
Yes.
honestly, I do. I think there's so much realism in Sims of our current age. Now, when you look back at GT5, it was real enough for the time. And then GT6, GT7 have obviously gotten better. iRacing at the time, I didn't think was very good back then. It seemed too tail happy. I didn't like the way the physics were, but it got a lot better. And I think what you see now is people who are learning the basic racecraft because they can go out and spend 15, 18, 20 hours a day doing nothing but racing. And they really, you just kind of get the racecraft. You're sitting there at your wheel and you're going, you're looking, and you figure out that you're not looking in the right place, or that you are looking in the right place and you are applying the throttle correctly or braking the way you're supposed to. So I think it does help build a lot of that. Honestly, would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that kind of training where you can spend, let's say, a really nice rig for $10,000 plus your iRacing subscription and all that. It's a lot less money to get that level of training. So, and then taking those people and moving them into a car, the only thing you have to teach them is how to deal with the G forces pulling you around in the seat.
As you would likely say, your favourite words in the car is patience, grasshopper, in the words of
Yes.
David Carradine from the iconic TV series Kung Fu. Well, Michael,
Yes.
funny enough, this episode has gone on longer, but for such great reason. Michael, thank you so much for being our latest guest here on episode 69 of Commentator's Corner. You can find Michael's website and Facebook page linked down below. Thank you so much for being a wonderful guest, and hopefully it won't be too long before we're announcing side by side once again in the virtual commentary box.
Thank you, and I look forward to it. We always have a great time in the booth.
We do indeed. Folks, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We are on YouTube. We are now doing shorts on a regular basis with regards to our regular guests. Also, we're on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. So if you want to give it a like, it may be one click for you, but for me personally, it means a hell of a lot. So a big thank you to Michael for being my guest here on Commentator's Corner. We've got a brilliant guest lined up for episode 70, and we're going to want you to get your questions in. So keep your eyes peeled on my social media for further information. Until next time, thanks for watching.